So what we got here today is a fresh machined engine block. It's a small block Chevy 350. It's coming out of a 87 Chevy Blazer, the big boy. Like I said, this is fresh from the machine shop. What I've done is to kind of streamline the process, and I also kind of want to walk you guys through the process involved when you assemble an engine. They normally, when you take it to a machine shop, you have them put together a short block. What that means is the rotating assembly is in there, and then they put the heads on. So that's pistons, crankshaft, camshaft, and then, like I said, most times they'll put the heads on there for you. But for content and instructional purposes, I wanted to demonstrate this for you guys so you guys can see actually what goes on when you put a motor together from scratch. Okay? So what needs to happen first to get this engine assembled is to pull all of the main caps off. That's what these are called. These are what hold the crankshaft down. I've already loosened these a little bit already. And this is a 350 again, is what I said before. It's a 4-bolt main 350. And you'll know that difference when you open it up, and you'll literally see 4 bolts on these caps. It's a stronger motor. It's the best 350 that you can buy for an old school, and the best one that came out in an old school, a 4-bolt main. So if you got one of these, you're in good shape. So once these are all loosened up, I pull these all off individually, and they have to be kept separate. Because when this is machined, the machinist machines this crankshaft journal to a specific tolerance. They're not all the same. So if I were to put this main cap over here on this side, then I would have issues with the engine. Probably not right away, but later down the line, it could have premature engine failure. It could knock, etc., because the clearances are totally different. So it's key that when I take these apart, I have them ordered in chronological order, in the positions that they go. Now, I have them all off. In preparation to place the crankshaft inside, what I'll need to do is insert engine bearings. This is what an engine bearing looks like from factory. Prior to me installing them, I have to put assembly lube on the bottoms and on the tops, because on the bottom here is where the crankshaft rides. So if I don't have assembly lube on these bearings prior to assembly, and I try to start it up, it'll have a dry start, and I could ruin the motor in literally 90 seconds from not just doing a simple thing as putting assembly lube on every component on this engine. You'll see me do. So we have the crank journals lubricated before I put my engine bearings on. This is what an engine bearing looks like. Got it in focus here. This is what your crankshaft is riding on. This is what the life of your engine is dependent upon. Shit like this. This little piece of metal. All right. So I got to carefully find the correct one. That's not it. I believe it's this guy here. Yes, sir. And snap those babies in. There we go. Each one has this like little, if you can see here, like this little locking tab right there at the top. It's specific to each journal, so you pretty much can't get it wrong. Each one goes in a spot. Now I got the bearings in. I gotta lubricate the actual inside of the bearings where the crankshaft is going to sit on. All of this stuff is to prevent a dry start when we first start this fresh motor, because it's not going to have any oil pressure on any of these bearings. So this is why we use this assembly lube, and so you can see it's like literally sliming away. It's super, super fucking thick. And it's necessary to literally break it in. That first 10 seconds is so critical. So I got to make sure I got this shit on the bearings, underneath it, so that the crankshaft doesn't starve for oil when it first is started. You don't use oil. You don't use grease. This shit is specific for engine assembly. It's not expensive, but you gotta use it. As a matter of fact, it kind of delayed me because you know, engine building is not something that's just done every day anymore. So I had to order some assembly lube. They didn't just have it sitting on the shelf because nobody just, oh, I'm building an engine in my backyard. Like, no, nobody's doing that anymore. Now, before we set the crankshaft into the motor, because I'm waiting on the rear main seal actually, and I'll show you what that means in a minute. I have to put the rear main seal in before I put the crankshaft in, and then I put the caps on. But in the meantime, I can put the pistons together, all right? Which means I have to put the rings on them, and there's a process for that, all right? So watch this. Now, there's a bunch of different rings. You got to identify which one go on first. The piston rings gladly come with instructions to tell you which rings go on. So I'm going to start with the bottom rings. This is basically called like the oil ring, this wavy one, and it gets sandwiched by 2 rings. So I'm going to put that one on first. There is a tool, but you don't really need it. You really just got to like wrap the rings around it. They expand a little bit, like so. The other ones are harder. I'll show you in a second. But yeah, we do one of these at a time. So we do that there. Now we'll put some lube on this in a second. These ones are just easier to put on because they're just more flexible. They're thinner, so they're more flexible and easier to work with. See, one goes at the bottom, and then another one sandwiches that wavy type of ring at the top. So we don't go like this. So now we got the bottom rings in, and we go to the next step. There's an order to how these rings have to go on the piston. It's essential, otherwise it'll never be right. It'll have low compression and it'll smoke the minute you start it up. For these thicker ones though, I'm gonna put a little bit of assembly lube around the piston. You don't want to scratch the piston, which you can do. Because as you can see, where I put it on, you see that one's it's much thicker. So it don't bend as easily. Boom. Slide her down. And then there we got another piston. Then lastly, as it says, it's our top piston. We're going to go at the top of the piston to finish things off. There's also an orientation to when I actually put the piston inside of the block. For an example, I have to orientate these little gaps right here. They all can't be like this. Example, they all can't line up open like this, basically. You see how they both open like that? That's where both the rings meet. They have to be in basically opposite directions, basically, so that you don't lose compression. Just something simple you have to do to orientate them. They're not going to move and go back to where they're open by each other, but you have to like clock them in different directions to, for compression's sake. All right. So as you can see, I have the crankshaft installed already. I actually misspoke because I said the correct thing and then I said the wrong thing. Like I said, I started off with saying this is a 4-bolt main. So that kind of changes how you assemble it just a little bit. The only differences between a 4-bolt main, and a 2-bolt main is the rear main seal. They started 1-piece rear main seals after 1987. And I forgot that small little detail. So that means I didn't have to wait, for a different 2-piece rear main seal because the bearing caps go on different. You just put the cap on here and then the seal actually is this big ass seal right here. It goes on the back. And then there's like this retainer that goes in the back. I have it in the shop somewhere. So I've got the crank all the way on there. I'm going to start putting each of the caps on, so I can torque them down good. And then we'll have that part of it done. And then I can start putting the pistons in. Crankshaft, is in. I got the caps on. I need to figure out what the torque specs are for the main caps. That is essential. Torque is essential when you're putting any fasteners on. So since it's a 4-bolt main, there's 2 different torque specifications. So the outside bolts are 68 foot-pounds. So I'm going to just put that one. Okay, and then the inner ones are a different torque. Start in the middle again. Got those all torqued down. Last order of business to get the rotating assembly, which is getting the crankshaft and the pistons in, called the rotating assembly. I've already got 7 of the pistons in there. I'm just going to quickly show you guys the process on actually getting the piston inside of the engine. All right, so I'm going to remove the cap from the rotor. And then I'm going to lube up the rod bearing caps underneath and on top. You don't want these going dry when we go and start this baby for the first time. So before we install, like I said, there's actually an orientation to how the rings go. They got to point in basically opposite directions so that you don't lose compression. So I'm going to set those up how they're supposed to be. Twist the motor back on the side we need it to be on. I like to put these little pieces of rubber tubes, they're just fuel holes, over the bolts, because if I nick up the crankshaft, it's over with. Over with meaning I got to pull it all apart and put it back together again. Pull it all apart, have the crankshaft polished before I put it back in there. Because if you nick the crankshaft, then there's a potential that it might knock. So right now, let me set up these rings in the orientation that they need to be. So I grab the piston compression tool, or piston ring compression tool. Sorry, tongue twister. Crank it down. And what it does is basically act what the block is doing. So it's going to clamp down the piston rings. And then once I have the piston rings clamped down, I can feed it in here into the block. Boom, like so. Then I grab my rubber mallet. I got to grab it from the bottom. See? And it's already in. Just like that. And then I flip her over. Take those trusty pieces of rubber tubing off so I don't damage the crank at all. And then I'm going to get my last cap. All right. Now the next order of business is to get the timing chain, get the camshaft in there inside, and then I'm going to be able to put the camshaft on there. But before I put the camshaft in there, I'm going to do what is called getting the motor to top dead center. And that brings the number 1 piston to top dead center at the top of its compression stroke. Once the engine that piston starts making compression, that's when it's making power. When it's done at the top of that is where you basically start your timing. There is a dot right here, and that signifies that the engine is at top dead center. And I also know that because the piston is right at the top of the deck of the block, it's called. We went melling with the cam. We actually went with a slightly bigger cam, in this case. Just something with a little bit more lift to it. I didn't want to get a cam that would require changing components in the cylinder head, like lifters and springs and whatnot, just to save the customer some money. So this is just a cam that's just gonna give it a little bit more oomph. It's not gonna have a lumpy idle, if that's what you're gonna ask. It's not gonna have any of that, but it's definitely gonna have more power than it did from factory. And that's all I wanted for him. Again, I'm gonna take my gloves off for this one, because when you're dealing with the cam and pistons and stuff like that, you don't want any like particles, anything that would have mistakenly got on your finger and transferred itself and made its way onto the camshaft and into the engine. It's not what you want. Take both my gloves off. Make sure I don't got shit on this camshaft. We want to goop her up good. We don't want to be stingy with this on the camshaft whatsoever. We don't have to be stingy. We got her all greased up. And every cam that I've ever put in, I've been able to feed just with my hands. And no need to put the cam gear on there, because you just got to hold it straight. There we have it. All right, camshaft is inside of the engine. Now the next order of business is to loop the timing chain assembly around it. What we need to do, just like we have that dot here, there's a dot on the bottom of the camshaft as well. Let me put that in focus. See that dot? That dot is at 6 o'clock, and the crank dot is at 12 o'clock. So they talk to each other. Put them shits up. Feed it on through there. Like so. Figure out where my camshaft is first, because there's a dowel pin on there. There's a pin right here. So what I'm going to do is first, I ain't even going to put the timing chain on there. Which is why it is helpful to put the gear when you're trying to feed the camshaft, because it just makes it easier trying to locate it. And actually I just need to put the bolts on there. With just one bolt, I was able to locate the timing gear so I can get the timing chain on. I torque the rest of them later, but now we have a completed short block. So we got a completed short block. Off camera, I broke in the engine. That's part of the engine rebuild process, is to break the engine. This is something that literally devotes and requires all of my devoted attention, because it's not something that you want to do twice. You got one time to do this shit. So what happens during that process is a freshly rebuilt motor has to be ran at about 2,000 to 2,500 RPM for about 20 to 25 minutes. What this does is to help seat the piston rings that you just put into the block. It's basically like marrying them together so that you have prolonged engine performance for years and decades to come. So when I do that process, I run the engine for about 25 minutes at 2,500 RPM. Before I even start this process, I got to make sure everything is tight. There's no leaks from the radiator. I got to make sure the fuel lines are right and connected tight. Nothing can leak, because during this process, I can't be interrupted at all by any inconvenience, such as a leaking radiator fitting or some random bullshit that'll cause me to stop what I'm doing, because this has to be done once and one time only. It's not something that you want to keep doing over and over, because I want to make sure my timing is right. I want to make sure I had a bottle of fuel just to put inside the fuel bowl so that it'll instantly start, because I instantly need to get it to the RPMs of 2,500 RPM. It cannot idle, because that's almost like a dry start, and that'll do damage to the camshaft and the pistons. So once that initial process is done, I do also use break-in oil. It's a special oil that you use. It's not some off-the-shelf shit that you get from O'Reilly's is specific for breaking in because it has a high concentrate of zinc. So once I do the break-in process and it's complete, I drop the oil, then I add another 5 quarts in, and for about 300 to 500 miles, you drive it moderately. You don't beat on it. You don't rev it up. No cold start revving. You don't want it to be idling for long periods of time for that 300 to 500 miles, which also aids in the break-in process. So once that 300 to 500 mile drive is done, then I'll drop the oil again, and then I'll add another fresh 5 quarts, and it's ready to go. Now, be mindful, ladies and gentlemen, when you get an engine rebuilt, that doesn't mean you can beat on it. All right. Different processes and different budgets determine what your engine is going to do. So for an example, this small block is just a base engine rebuild. It's not a performance build. I did go with a slightly larger cam, but the valve train is stock, which means everything in the heads is stock. The crank and the rods are all stock specifications. So it's not something that you can go just because it's new, go in the parking lot and start doing donuts in it and thinking because you got a new motor, you're invincible. All right. So that's the gist of the whole process from rebuilding to breaking the engine in. Again, like I said, I didn't record breaking in the engine process because it's something that I have to have my full concentration on. Nothing can leak, nothing weird can happen. And I was able to do that. The engine started up first try. There were no leaks. Everything went smoothly.